prayer on the top of your handout. Please pray with me. O Lord, who wonderfully created and yet more wonderfully restored the dignity of human nature, grant that we may share the divine life of him who humbled himself to share our humanity, your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives with reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so we're going to talk about kindness again, and kind of want to explain why I picked this parable to do it, which we've talked about in this group, but it was, according to my notes, it was 2021, so I figured 5 years later we're okay to talk about it again. So kindness actually isn't a term that shows up a whole lot in the Bible, but the passages as it does are pretty popular ones, which I'll reflect on in a bit. So last week we talked about a term that kind of does just mean what we mean by kindness, the everyday meaning of kindness, which it would be, like treating other people good in ways that they would flourish, and doing it for its own sake, not something you would kind of get out of it, right? And this tends to show up in a list that the Apostle Paul gives us, right? He's got a list of all these fruits of the Spirit or whatnot, and kindness is one of those terms. And in his epistles, he's constantly telling people to be good and to be kind, right? It's a generic idea where he's not telling you exact things to do, right? But he's saying be kind. And this term has this idea of you are doing good to other people in ways that they would flourish. And, again, we get it in those lists. But I was thinking about other passages that use the word kindness. And there's only, in the New Testament, there's actually only a few that actually use that same word. And one of them is tied up when Jesus says, my burden is light, my yoke is easy. That word that translates easy there is actually related to this term kindness, right? So like Jesus is being kind to us by giving us an easy yoke rather than a hard one, right? But that term doesn't show up elsewhere. So I did an English language word search of kindness, right? And thought about some passages. And one of the ones that stuck out to me it's a very famous passage. So Micah, Martin Luther King made this passage famous. So it's Micah 6 to 8. I'm going to read those verses, and the kindness comes at the end. But he says, with what shall I come before thee, Lord, and bow myself before him on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with the calves a year old? Yeah, this isn't on your handout. So, will the Lord be pleased with thousands of grams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? So it's, can I do all of these things? Will that somehow win God's favor, right? And then what we're told is, he has told you, the NRSV says, oh, mortal. This is one of the most annoying things, I think, in the NRSV. This is actually the term, the Son of Man. So when Jesus says, a son of man, this is the kind of word he's using, which basically just means human being, right? But I think they're doing it to be gender neutral, but it actually misses that connection than when Jesus is using the same term in the New Testament. So he says, he has told you, O Son of Man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. So we get that word kindness there. And then I wanted to know, well, how did the early church, or the Jews who were speaking Greek, how did they translate this Hebrew word there? And it's the word that we usually translate mercy, to show mercy, right? And so this parable that Jesus tells here is oftentimes one of the parables we go to say what his teaching on what mercy is. But I think it's also interesting to think that this is also kind of, here, our words for mercy and kindness, there's kind of this overlap, right? So I think this is a good place to go to see what Jesus would tell us about kindness, right? It's also a parable that really kind of gets us into, we need to see what's going on in Jesus' world and how he structures things. So on your handout on the front, I've given some notes in we're going to look at Luke 10, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The other Gospels don't have this parable, but they do have very similar interactions where, what Jesus is talking with a scribe, right? So if you look at the Mark 12 passage, right, again we get some scribes that come to him. They ask him which commandment is the first of all. Jesus famously gives two, right? Obey God and love your, basically love God and love your neighbor. And here we get the teacher a scribe affirming Jesus. In Luke's version of this story, if it's the same story, he's really changed the details. Okay, he's really he's tweaked it, and here he has a scribe is trying to trap Jesus. So it goes from what could have been a friendly conversation to now it's an antagonistic conversation. So maybe it's two different versions, or maybe Lucius he received it differently. We don't really know, right? We get Jesus tells a parable here, but we also get in the Mark version the idea of that Jesus tells us about showing mercy. Like those words actually end up in the words of the mouth of the scribe, right? So it's kind of this back and forth interesting thing. But this is, of course, a very famous parable. And by the way, on the back of your handout, I've kind of tried to sketch out how it works, because I think we tend to miss how the passage really operates. In terms of, Jesus does a really interesting thing here of, the scribe asks him questions. If you notice, Jesus never answers one. He instead asks questions back. Gets the scribe to think, and he does them out of order. He doesn't answer his first question first, because when he kind of is answering the questions by asking other questions, right? But he's kind of getting the scribe to figure out the answer and to see how it works. But there's all of these patterns. But I want to unpack this a little bit, and then we can talk about it, right? So, first thing is we need to get over 2,000 years of sort of this parable being in the church if we're really going to get what it was saying. So if I say the word Good Samaritan, what do you think? Kindness. It's great we're talking about kind of like what do we think of a Good Samaritan as? That's a really good person, right?
Does a good deed.
Person does it. I mean, that's how we use the term. If you look up Good Samaritan in the dictionary or in some kind of idiom dictionary, it's going to tell you a person who's kind, a person who does good deeds, right? In Jesus' day, saying Good Samaritan would be like saying a good Nazi. Samaritans are the worst people that are possible for Jesus' audience, right? Jesus is the pattern of this parable. When we've got the priest, the Levite, and the good Samaritan. And that's a pattern for a good joke, right? It's a rabbi, a priest, a pastor. Right? I mean, it's and you should actually expect an order. Like so, the expected order here would be the priest, a Levite, a common Jew. Just a regular person, right? And that would be the pattern of kind of showing the regular person's actually the more faithful one. Jesus puts a twist on it on purpose and picks in enemy, right? So like the audience is actually going to go, whoa, that's not what we expected. He's breaking the pattern of a joke, but he's also doing it in a really kind of poking way. Like, I mean, if Jesus was telling this a joke in Israel in 2026, the pattern might be an IDF a soldier, a Jewish medical worker, third person is a Hamas fighter. Like he's really taking the enemy and putting them in the third category, right? Because the Jews at the time hate the Samaritans. There's this huge conflict. The reason for it is it's historical and racial. So one, the Jews see the Samaritans as these half-breeds. Their heritage is partially Jewish, but the origin of the Samaritans is when Israel is brought into exile to Babylon. These are the people who got left behind, and they were so small that they basically had to find partnerships with other people in the area. So they didn't kind of maintain the ethnic purity. And they're seen as the people who kind of took everybody's land because they stayed, right? I mean, there's all kinds of parallels we can make with contemporary conflicts over there, right? But that same kind of thing is happening already in Jesus' time. Well, this is conflict over land, over who's got the truth in terms of religion, over racial and ethnic purity. All of these things are involved here. But Jesus twists this story. Yep.
Could they tell they were Samaritan by their physical features or their clothing or when they...
Excellent question. There's probably a bit of an accent issue. There probably could be something like that, right? Because there was even, we get that in the story of Peter, where at the very end when he denies Jesus, and there's 3 times it's pointed out, weren't you with Jesus? The third time they actually say, we can tell by your accent you're from Galilee. So even among the Jews in different regions, there's an accent difference. So they probably could have heard that. But if we read the parable, is the guy who's hurt, because we don't ever learn his name, right? Does he ever speak? He's actually never conscious in the whole parable. Like he gets beat up and the guy takes him. So we don't ever hear him speak. He's also stripped naked. Because you could have also identified from their clothes. So this is actually, Jesus is telling a really intelligent parable of all the markers that would tell us who this person who got beat up is are removed. No one can know. We don't know as people hearing the story, and the characters in the story don't know either. So we actually don't know who the guy who got beat up is. Is he a Jew or is he a Samaritan?
Because that's immaterial.
It's immaterial to the whole, again, we're going to get ahead of ourselves, but the whole point is you're kind to everybody. Shouldn't matter who they are. But Jesus is actually doing this on purpose. I mean, the way he tells the story, the parable, all of that is removed. So that's the whole point is yes, they could, but Jesus has told the story on purpose in a way where that's been removed. Right, so we actually don't know the identity of the person, right? The only identities we know are the 3 people who could have helped him, right?
And the direction he was going.
And the direction he's going, which is another thing. So again, another thing we need to clear up on this parable is, I know that at least I, growing up, heard this parable preached multiple times, and there was always an element of, well, the reason why the priest and the Levite don't help him is because he could have been dead, and if they touch a dead body, they'll be ritually unclean. Blah 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 blah. And it's also oftentimes used as to see, look how silly and awful Jewish law is. So we get this sort of excuse for them built in, but then it's also used as this anti-Semitic trope, right? So the one key thing in here is which direction are they going? If we look at the parable. So that's on verse 30 and 35 is the parable, right? Once a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. So he's coming from Jerusalem to Jericho. So if he's a priest, once we get this, a priest who's going they're going the same direction, was also going down the road, right? The priest would have been ritually unclean if he would have touched this guy and he was dead. But it doesn't matter because he's already done his work in the temple. He's coming home. He has no excuse. Nobody's got an excuse in the parable, right, to not help this guy. And again, really quickly, the way the parable is told gives us all that information, right? Again, other things that we just don't pick up on because it's in our culture. This is a well-known path. It's an 18-mile trip. It's downhill from Jerusalem to Jericho. I think I probably told you all this before. In 2019, when I was in Israel, I was going the opposite way from Jericho up to Jerusalem. When we were in Jericho, it was well over 100 degrees because you're actually below sea level. You're not far from the Dead Sea. And by the time we got up to Jerusalem, 18 miles, it was 65. Right, just because you're going up and you're at this higher elevation, and you're kind of up in the hills, and right. So there's a huge difference, right, in just a short area. Go ahead.
It's also known in the near there that road was known for robbers.
Yeah.
They would, pounce on people that that road and get robbed.
So I mean, it was too hard to get it all set up. But if you have been, like at some point I'll show you some pictures. Like it really is this like desert path, but like the trails, parts of the trail of the original road are still there. And it's like a path, but there's all these like hills and places to hide. Like you can actually, when you're there and you see it, you're like, yeah, people could hide behind this big rock over here and jump out and rob me. Like it makes a sense once you see it. It's also the path where Absalom, David's son, chases him back in the Old Testament. So this is a famous path. It's well known as a dangerous road at the time, right? Everybody knows about it, right? So again, Jesus is using information that his audience would have been very familiar with, right? It's like taking 31 to Holland. I mean, like we all know that you can't speed on that route because for some reason it's 55 the whole way, right? Only place I've ever gotten a speeding ticket ever in my life is on that stretch. Right? Right? I mean, but again, this is my point. Like we all know that. Like I say that, you all know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Well, Jesus is telling this story. His audience knows this road, right? It's very common, right? So that's just, I think, some things are worth pointing out, right? He's really packed things in, right? Again, the priest and the Levite don't have any excuse to not help this guy. In fact, if we know our Old Testament well, they're required to. They should have stopped and helped, right? So this is that's kind of the context of the parable. If we look at the framing, so we get a lawyer, we're told here, right? So this is a teacher of the law who's also probably working as a lawyer, whether we think of a lawyer who works in a courtroom or is interpreting and using the law. So this lawyer comes and tells him, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" This is one of the things I have on the handout, some observations. But if we just, again, pause here and think, right? Do you usually need to do anything to inherit something?
Just be the right person.
You need to be a something, not do a something, right? You usually just have to be a child of someone or a relative of someone, or they put you in their will. Like, because of who you are, you've been chosen to inherit. You don't usually have to do anything to inherit. If you do, you have bad parents. I'm just going to put it that way, right? I mean, this is right, and the lawyer should know this. Right? No good Jew ever thought that they have to do works for God to love them and give them salvation. Right? That's a Christian idea that we have used to, again, distort a Jewish teaching. Right? They think salvation is by a grace too. Right? No, I guess there's some kind of difference in how we understand law and identity, but like the lawyer's already putting this in a pretty weird way, right? So he asked this question to Jesus, and Jesus asked the question back. What is written in the law? How do you read it? So basically what he says, right? So how do you understand it, Jesus says. And the lawyer responds, you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself, right? So again, those are Jesus' words elsewhere. So I think we should actually read this as we're actually then told, right? The lawyer is trying to put Jesus to the test in the very first verse. So he's repeating Jesus' own words back to him. He's probably heard Jesus teach these things before, because then Jesus says, right? You've answered right. Do this, and you will live. Right? So the lawyer is somehow trying to trap Jesus. Jesus is going to say something that's going to get him in trouble with the authorities, or they can pounce on him. They have ammo now to go after him, right? And Jesus just affirms what he says, which are, of course, are Jesus' own words. Right? But if we pause there and say, right, you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, do this and you'll be saved. We should all pause and say, well, how many of us do this perfectly? Right? And if you raise your hand, I'm going to tell you you're a liar. Right? But again,
and the answer is present.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you will live.
You will live, right? I mean, it's the idea is like this is going to happen right now, right? Right. I mean, and there's actually some Old Testament parallels here of like if you do all these things, you will live. So I mean, in a sense, Jesus is affirming him, but he's not giving him anything. He's affirming his own words. He's kind of pushing back on him. So then the lawyer asks another question: who's my neighbor? Well, this is a good lawyer's question, right? So you just told me I need to love God, I need to love my neighbor, right? So now the question is, well, who's my neighbor, right? And of course, we all know what the answer is. The right answer is any human being you come into contact with. But the lawyer doesn't want that answer, right? In fact, what he probably wants, if you turn my handout over, if you look at, there's some footnotes on the bottom. So there's Leviticus in chapter 19, right? Says, you shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not profit by the blood of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate in your heart anyone of your kin. You shall reprove your neighbor, or you will incur guilt upon yourself. You shall not take a vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So if that was the whole extent of the passage, there's a way to read this that says, my neighbor, if I'm this lawyer, are other Israelites. And that's where it stops. Right? I'm only obligated to love my neighbor in the sense of my actual fellow citizens, or people who are practicing the same religion as me, right? I won't say too much about this, but this is actually the kind of thing we're hearing from many of our politicians right now, right? Of who do I owe? Who should I be? Only our own people. Like anybody else is not. We don't owe them anything. We don't have to be kind or loving or merciful to anyone else, right? So the lawyer's entertaining that idea, but if you would keep reading in that same chapter, if we go down about 15 verses, it also says, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God, right? So like the same passage this guy could have possibly appealed to for the answer he wants undermines it. I just want to, if you keep reading. Anyway, so Jesus responds to his question of who's my neighbor. So this is by telling a parable, which Jesus likes to do. He doesn't like give you the answer you want in a textbook, right? Or like here's the definition of what a neighbor is. He instead tells a story, right? And we're supposed to get the answer. So we'll read the parable. Once a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers. And they stripped him and beat him and left, leaving him half dead. Now by coincidence, a certain priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite too came to that place. He also saw him and passed by on the other side. And a certain a Samaritan came upon him, saw him, and had compassion on him. The Samaritan went to him, bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put him on his own beast, brought him to the inn, and took care of him. The next day, as he was going on his way, he took out 2 denarii. This would be basically what an average worker makes in a day. And so minimum wage for a day. And gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and when I return, I will pay back whatever else you need to spend on him." Which of these 3 do you think proved a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, "The one who showed mercy on him." And Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." So I want to unpack the parable a bit, but I think the really key thing we should notice right away is, notice how Jesus has flipped this entirely on its head. Because what is the lawyer asking? What did he ask? Who's my neighbor? And what did Jesus ask at the end? Who was the neighbor to the other person? So Jesus actually wants you to, this is the key, if you take anything away, the wrong question is, who is my neighbor? The right question is, who should I be a neighbor to? So I'm not supposed to identify the neighbor, I'm the neighbor. Right? And I think that's one of the key things that Jesus does here. Right?
I'm just thinking about that road that goes down. And it says that he brought him to the inn.
Yeah.
And I don't really remembering any little villages along that road. So whether he went all the way to Jericho then or
Well, so we don't know. I mean, it's a day trip.
Yeah.
On foot to today. I mean, 18 miles in a day, so you can do that, but it's all day. He's clearly on a horse, or a mule, or a donkey. The priest probably would have been too. The Levite may have been on foot, right? But again, any of them could have, at least at a minimum, stopped and cleaned the guy up and gave him a drink of water and see what he was doing. Put him on the back of the donkey, get him somewhere, right?
How many innkeepers would have been familiar with seeing a Samaritan, who
Yeah.
would recognize him as
Yeah.
bringing a Jewish man
Right.
to him?
Well, again, we don't even know if the guy is Jewish, right? So there's that whole element, right? Right, and so
Kathy too, remember it's a story.
yeah, right, but I do think we're supposed to think about all these details.
To tell you something.
But I do think we're supposed to catch all those details, right? But again, like it is, so like one of the commentators that I read, the example he used for this was, imagine if we were in the Wild West, and this happened, right? So you've got a sheriff comes across this guy, doesn't help him. A cowboy comes and sees him, doesn't help him, and then the word he used was Indian, right? Indian comes and helps him, right? Is the Indian doing a very smart thing by putting the guy on the back of his horse and going into the white town, and dropping the guy out? They're probably going to think he was the one that beat him up, right? And he's the one. And is he going to get out of there with his own life, right? So there's that whole element of this, because we are in a Jewish territory the whole way on this trip, right?
Is Jericho all Jewish too?
Yep. So this is all at the time. That's all in Jewish territory, right? Jericho today is technically in the West Bank, and so it's actually predominantly Arab. Yep.
Good question. Why would a Samaritan be going down?
Because they can't. I mean, it isn't as if they're going to beat anybody up who's
No.
traveling. So he's. I mean, all we're told in the story is it's a traveling Samaritan. That's not what we're told. So is he on business? Right? We don't know. We don't know.
He's got a horse.
He's on an animal, so he's got to have some means, right? So he's doing something, right? And I think this is kind of the thing. The priest and the Levite, again, if we don't know for sure, but if we kind of read into the culture of the time, right? They're coming home from doing something. There's all kinds of people who live in Jericho and commute to Israel, basically, right? So they're going home from doing something in Jerusalem. A Samaritan we don't know, right? But he's clearly doing some business-related thing, I think, was what we should speculate. And so,
Leaving the guy and saying, I'll be back and check on it.
yeah, well, so that's the other, but like that's the other thing is like he's actually the one who's most interrupting his schedule compared to everybody else, right?
Perhaps the innkeeper is also being.
Well, so I think we should get into that. So again, it's a cultural thing of the time. We don't want to read too much into it, but innkeepers aren't thought of highly in Jesus' day. Like this will be an example that will make sense to us, right? Innkeepers are the kind of person who refill the bottles with tap water and sell them to you. That's what an innkeeper is. Like in Jesus, like they're not good people. Like good people don't run inns. Like it's a look down upon profession, right? And think about what this guy does. He gives the innkeeper a check. He says, "Here's, 2 days a salary. Take care of this guy. I'll come back I'll check on him, and if I owe you anything else, I'll pay it." Well, I mean, how many innkeepers aren't going to be like, well, I'm going to charge everything this guy gets, like open mini bar and everything, right? Right. Well,
Because they just boot him out.
well, but that's the other reason why the innkeeper has to pay him for two days worth, because if the guy is still there and isn't paying, he can be sold into slavery. So like the innkeeper is like making sure this guy's taken care of. 2 days pay, and I'll be back and I'll cover anything else. Like above and beyond here, right? So again, those are all the things kind of happening in the story, right? So again, the context is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus tells this story, and so we get to the end, and Jesus asks, which of these three do you think proved a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And the scribe or the lawyer answers, the one who showed mercy on him. And Jesus says, go and do likewise, right? I mean, again, flipping this whole thing on its head, right? So there's other things we can say here, but do you have questions or comments on this point? Yep.
Well, I'm intrigued by this. You brought it up before, so it's not a new idea to me, but to be a neighbor. When we take our dog for a walk, we sometimes end up on paths where every fourth tree it says private property.
Yep.
Stay out of here,
Yep.
don't even look at it, so there is this boundary line that gets set up. So, and we have a fence in our backyard, which is a boundary line too. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do you be a neighbor? And what do you do with boundary lines? Or is there no boundary lines if you're a neighbor and everything's open? So it's sort of like the people who lived on the Great Blasket Island. Everybody just walked into everybody's house as though it was a commune or something. So what about retreating inside your boundary and closing the boundary off? Are you being a neighbor? I mean, it's just, I'm caught up with the notion of boundaries and retreating and being welcoming. I don't know. Any wisdom on that, Matt?
So I think the first observation I would make is I think it's very important to notice that when we get into these sorts of moral questions, the Bible doesn't ever kind of give us we want a treatise written by a philosopher that's got point 1, point 2, point 3. Here's what you do, and this is it's like reading Kant or something. It applies every single time, right? The Bible doesn't ever operate that way, because I think it anticipates that people will be reading and trying to live by its precepts in very different contexts, right? And that we have to adapt to those contexts, but there's still principles in terms of how we treat other people, right? I mean, so again, treat someone the way you want to be treated, right, is a very good rule because it applies in all kinds of different situations, right? Living in, Italy in the 5th century is different from living in Michigan in the 21st. Like, how I want to be treated is going to be dependent on what I expect in the culture and context that I'm in, right? Rather than saying everyone always, like, think of, like, if we try to pass a law that says, everybody has to be guaranteed an income of $3,000 a month. That's great right now, but in 21-26, when inflation has been building for 100 years, $3,000 might be, your hourly wage at minimum wage, right? I mean, again, it's like those hard and fast rules don't work. And when you're trying to talk, so I think that's the first thing we should hold on to. Two, I think you're pointing at something though, which is we create boundaries to protect ourselves. And there is this whole idea we can retreat. So like part of the reason why I might want to build a fence is actually to protect myself from my neighbor. Right? And this is, it is pushing us to sort of say, like, rather than creating a boundary to keep people out, if there are boundaries, it's actually to bring people in. So that's one thing I would say. I think if we even think about, some of these examples here, again, this depends on how our society is organized, right? One good reason for having boundaries, like property lines, is I'm responsible for taking care of this space. You're responsible for taking care of your space, right? But we're all going to take care of our space. Why? Not just for ourselves, but for the good of everybody in our community, right? But if all of us are responsible for everything, nothing will get done. Or a very small group of people will be ones doing all of the work. So I do think there's some wisdom to having, like, this is your property. Take care of it, but why are you taking care of it? If it's only for your own well-being, you cease being a neighbor.
I thought it was interesting, we haven't talked about the family that was killed.
Yeah.
They were interviewing one of his neighbors, and he talked about the fact that the guilt he felt was the fact that he wasn't a good neighbor. That he didn't know them, didn't know that there was something wrong going on in the family, and that his pledge from here on was to try to be a better neighbor. So that was kind of interesting.
Well, again, I think, but don't we all do that, right? It's if I think of where I live, in a sense I have 3 neighbors, or 3 houses that border our property, right? One of them we know fairly well. We see them outside all of the time. It helps that they have a kid that's the same age as one of our kids, right? And so, like, there's a natural connection. The people across the street, we talk to and we're friendly to, and they will check up on us and we'll check up on them. But then the third house, I bet I've talked to the person who lives in that house twice in 7 years. And I think she's grumpy and mean. Right? But I also know some of these things, right? She's had a tough time, right? And I do oftentimes think we should make the effort to go over there, or at least when I see her outside, to start a conversation, right? But sometimes I just don't want to, right? Which, that's on me, right? I think that's the honest way of putting it is, but again, that's the point, right? Is like these boundaries we create, we oftentimes, rather than using them to be neighborly, they become convenient excuses for, I'm going to do my own thing, right? And again, like, what is the, I mean, I think what we're being encouraged by Jesus here is when we see someone in need, we help, right? I mean, in this scenario, you can't ask, right? I mean, the guy's we're told he's half dead, right? He's not talking. He needs immediate help. So you help him, and his identity doesn't matter. I mean, again, when Jesus tells this parable, the audience hearing it, which is presumably all Jews, they have to put themselves in this situation where the hero of the story is a person you don't like, right? A person you really don't like. Go ahead.
Well, so I'm thinking of another story about a Samaritan of Jesus with the woman at the well.
Yep.
Just off the top of your head, are those the only two instances of interaction with Samaritans or not?
I think it's the only ones that are like really explicit. Jesus does travel through Samaria, and he kind of goes to Samaritan towns. Yeah, right. Because I mean, they're a convenient group of people for Jesus in particular, because he's starting his ministry up in Galilee, but he goes back and forth from Galilee to Jerusalem, and the quickest route takes you through the heart of Samaria. But oftentimes Jews would take the longer route just to not have to travel through it. I mean, this is how intense the hatred is. Right, so
that let's say that instead of there being a border down there in Mexico, that the panhandle of, let's say, Oklahoma belongs to Mexico.
Yep.
And the United States is down on the south, and it's also on the north. The shortest way from Texas to Kansas is through the panhandle, but you're going to have to go through Mexico.
Yeah.
It'd be something similar.
Yeah, and you're going to go, people would go around just so they don't have to go into it.
To get to.
Well, even when you drive a car, different.
Well, right, exactly. It's different too, but
It's a change of time and energy.
but I mean, but again, this is the, Jesus uses them often to try to talk about, like, there's this other, but of course he's always bringing them in, right? But never in a way that's forceful either, right? He I mean, when he's there, he realizes he's the stranger, and engages in ways that invites people in, right?
But then you have the story when Jesus tells that, it's to the people of Israel I've come.
Right, which is, but again, think of that story, right? Personally, I think the best way to read that story is Jesus is testing the disciples. Because I might be mixing some stories up, but he's been teaching them that I'm here for everybody. All the nations of the earth are going to be coming in, right? And then he does have this interaction with this Samaritan woman and says some pretty mean things, right? But again, the context, if we look at the passage just earlier, he's including everybody. So I think he's trying to see if the disciples will go, wait a minute, Jesus, this contradicts what you just told us, right? The other way people read that parable is to say that Jesus actually gets corrected by her. I have a hard time with that way of reading, just because I don't think Jesus made that kind of mistake. But however we take it, by the time we get to the end of the parable, we're told that attitude of Jesus is wrong, whether it's his actual attitude or whether it's something he's putting on to try to teach the disciples. Either way, like, he admits that this is not the way forward, right? That we should be including these people. Linda.
It shouldn't surprise us that he takes the Samaritans as his example when in his very first sermon, points out that the prophets didn't get sent to the Jewish people in the time of famine. They got sent to the foreigners.
I mean, he's constantly trying to expand a circle. Everybody's included. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? He's also, though, doing it from a certain starting point, right? And so he does it instantly. I mean, if Jesus had started his ministry by saying, God loves us, and he loves the Samaritans, and he loves the Romans, they would have beat him up. Well, they already tried to beat him up. It would have been worse. Right? You don't start by saying our enemies are people God loves too, right? Because people will go like this. I mean, he earns people's trust, and that circle expands and expands and expands. Bob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think Jesus' prime objective was to reform Judaism, to get the Jews back to doing, the Abrahamic covenant of the Jews were supposed to bring God to all the nations in the world, and they haven't been doing that. So the primary objective is, rather than himself have to do it all, he's wanting to get the Jews to get back to what they've always supposed to have been doing, and then God can be brought to the nations again. And so I think that has always been his starting point. Yep. But then he branched out. And after the story you're talking about with the Samaritan woman, he immediately goes to Gentile territory and starts preaching there. Yep. So I think there is part of an evolution of Jesus' ministry from, let's start with the basics, and then broaden out from there.
Well, and again, if we even think of the way the New Testament develops, I mean, the Gospels are almost entirely, almost everybody in the Gospels is Jewish. Yes, we have some Samaritans, and we get Jesus going to Gentiles, and we get some other people, but for the most part, it's all of his followers are Jewish, with a few surprising exceptions. Right? He's also got all these women involved in a very patriarchal society. So he's bringing people in, but he isn't overthrowing everything at once. I don't think he thinks that will work, but he does. But then if we keep going, like we get into Acts and everything in the Paul's epistles, right? I mean, Paul himself is constantly saying the Jews are supposed to be the ones doing this. And actually, in Romans entertains the idea that the whole reason why God is bringing the Gentiles into the church is to shame the Jews, which I think we should be careful with that, right? But there is this idea of this is what Israel's supposed to be doing all along, bringing the Gentiles in. It is happening because, in a certain sense, Jesus is Israel. But of course, he wants the rest of Israel to come along with him, right? And they do, but only in very small numbers. The majority of Israel refuses, right? And that's a complicated history that we're still trying to unpack and make a sense of, right? But that's right. I mean, this is why we should never take that path of the church has replaced Israel. They're supposed to exist alongside and eventually be integrated, right? But it's never a replacement. And I think that ties us back into this whole kindness and neighborliness of, I mean, if we want to think big, and this gets into boundaries and things, I mean, what do we do as a church if we're really going to be welcoming to everyone? A couple of us were at the Presbyterian women's meeting earlier this week, and one of the, I'm not going to get this quite right how she put it, but one of the speakers, was actually hinting at often what happens when the American church wants to welcome other people in, we kind of get this a mild reproduction of colonialism. Where yes, others are welcome, but we expect them to instantly adapt to our way of doing things. Right? And one way of actually welcoming somebody in is to say, well, yes, you're coming into my space, inside my fence, but I want you to feel welcome here. So you should be able to bring some of your things in with you. but we really don't like that, right? I mean, it would be, you brought up gardening somebody, like it'd be someone comes into your yard and plants something you don't want there because that makes them feel comfortable, right? I mean, this is what we're trying to figure out, right? But I mean, again, the idea is we ought not be asking, who should I be a neighbor? I mean, it isn't who's the person who I'm obligated to be a neighbor to. It's rather, I need to think about how do I be a neighborly to everyone I come in contact with, right? Rather than saying, well, I'm going to be a neighbor to you over here, but there's reasons I don't have to be a neighbor to you, right? Anyway, it's 11, so it's a good place to stop.
So,